So I think we are we live? I think so. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are out there. Thank you all very much for joining this fantastic panel on developing a digital competency framework for local partners. I wanted to start by basically sharing a little bit of context on why or how this panel came together. About a year ago, in the first ICT for Development Partnerships Conference, Sonja Ruetzel, the curator of this conference and the parent conference, ICT for Development Conference, came to myself and a few others saying, how about we organize a panel about how are we supporting local partners through these COVID times? What are the digital tools, the approaches that we are taking, the guidelines, the standards that we are taking to support our local partners working remotely and operating in their countries and in their context. I would like to think that today the discussion is going to be about how we continue to do this beyond the pandemic. I think we have obviously an opportunity to keep the momentum that we've been gaining over the last couple of years of working closer with our local partners, building their competences, building the capacity, in some cases specific to technology, but in some other cases in a sort of a wider context. I think one thing that for me kind of resonates a lot in relation to what we're discussing today is that as a result of the COVID pandemic, we've seen what I would call an acceleration of digitalization across sectors of our society. Humanitarian and development sectors are very much or have very much been affected by that acceleration. And as a result, many organizations have initiated, thinking strategies, plans of, how do we go about digital transformation that comes as a result of that acceleration. In some cases, organizations were ready to do that. In some other cases, organizations weren't necessarily ready to do that. Depends on sizes, depends on budgets, depends on resources. The nonprofit sector is not always ready to take on these big transformation projects because organizationally, it's very different to other sectors. But the one thing that I would like, that I think is very important is when we think about these digital transformations, traditionally people think about people, processes, and technology. I think partners, in our case, in our sector, are a critical component of the digital transformation that we want to see. And in doing that digital transformation, we need to be thinking of partners as a way for us to localize, I think, the way we are using digital technologies, and in doing so, how these local partners can become leaders in their own societies, in their own digital ecosystems, beyond the life of the programs that we are supporting. Ultimately, I think that's a key objective and something that we will be touching on as we discuss today. Today's discussion is going to have a combination of local and international NGO partners. Brief introduction to them. We have Sonja Bechart, correct? From one of my favorite organizations since I transitioned from telecoms to international development, with robotics, their model and how they've developed the model of flying labs, which is kind of a spin-off, I would say, by now of what We Robotics was, is an incredible example of very specific to the area of robotics, drones, UAVs, etc. But a fantastic example of how something in a relatively short amount of time can be global and local at the same time, and having an amazing amount of impact. We will be hearing from Tawanda Chihambakwe, who is representing Flying Labs in Zimbabwe. and no pressure, but he'll be representing the entire of the Flying Labs community. We'll be hearing from Nora Lindstrom and the Catholic Relief Services experience. I think, there are very few organizations out there in the international NGOs that have been using technology for so long. And I think Catholic Relief Services will bring some fantastic examples of what are they currently thinking, what is the thinking in terms of working with partners and building their capacity as part of technology, but beyond. And we'll also be hearing from David Rogers, CEO of Prakelt, a local NGO based in South Africa that over the years, and again, a recent story over the last probably 2-3 years, has gone global. And not with an emerging technology, but with technology, WhatsApp in particular, that everybody's using in their day-to-day lives. They've managed to kind of create a community around the use of WhatsApp for social impact. That is a fantastic story, and we'll be hearing from her about that. So with that said, I'm gonna pass it over to Sonja from We Robotics. She's gonna do a short presentation case study of We Robotics and Flying Labs. And after that, we'll go ahead and start the panel. Thank you, Sonja.
Thank you so much, Jesus. Thank you for the introduction. Just give me 30 seconds. I will share my screen. Just move things around on my screen here. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jesus. So as Jesus mentioned, I would like just to talk for some brief minutes about the Flying Labs network and our model on localizing capacity in an inclusive, sustainable, and collaborative way. Oops. Went too far. So I wanted to start out with just building on what Jesus just said in his introduction, and also how this session came together, kind of the session background. And Jesus shared that with me before, and it was really interesting to see that there's actually some keywords coming out of there. So one of the keywords for me was to see that it talks about the grand bargain. You see on top, I read a really interesting article published by ODI on kind of the failure of that promise in terms of localization. Then a lot of the keywords that came out that I read in Jesus' session's background was around leadership, around ownership, around sustainability, talking about ecosystems. And one that's really also kind of piqued my interest was a sentence that kind of said we must include local partners as key stakeholders. So I want to kind of build on these keywords and come back to them in just a minute. But before that, I wanted to introduce to you the Flying Labs network and a bit of background to that. So when we talk about localization, it's very important that for us, it's not about the what, it's not about the technology. And when I come back just to this one, and if I look at the keywords, none of them is about technology. It's about the who, and it's about the how. So this is a very important base for any kind of discussion we're having, to say, though, okay, we build capacity for technology, in the end, it's not about the technology. It's about how it will be used, and it's about who has the leadership and the ownership. So it's all about local experts and communities holding the power. And for us, the global actors, the INGOs, to hand it over. And this is why we started just over 6 years ago our own journey of doing that with the Flying Labs network. So the Flying Labs network started with a proof of concept in 2016 with 3 Flying Labs. A 4th one was added some months in. And today it has grown to a global network of 33 Flying Labs, anywhere from Latin America to Africa, to Asia and the Pacific, and it keeps on growing organically. Now, what this means, we'll see in just a second. You see one is sticking out in red here, and I just wanted to mark Zimbabwe Flying Labs, as we have my colleague Tawanda here today, to kind of give you an idea of where Tawanda is coming from. And so we're going to hear from him in person a bit later. So as Jesus said, the timeline is actually quite short because we introduced our affiliation model in 2018. And since then, the Flying Labs network has grown from 4 to 33 today, grows at about, I'd say, anywhere to like 4 to 10 new Flying Labs a year. And it has kept growing even during the COVID pandemic, though a bit slower, but it has kept growing. So for us, this is a really positive sign that this is fast growth, but also very steady growth of the network. So what are Flying Labs? Flying Labs are independent knowledge hubs that convene local experts in professional drone, data, robotics, and AI services. And the goal is always tied to SDGs, so it's all around accelerating social good projects. Flying Labs are building on existing local organizations, and that's a really key element to the Flying Labs network and to the model that we have behind that, saying there's a lot of existing expertise, local expertise that is out there. So the Flying Labs network actually takes advantage of that, and Flying Labs are hosted by existing local organizations. They can establish their own Flying Labs and they join the network on their own demand. So a lot of times I get the questions, they're like, where are you going to open your next Flying Labs? And the reply is always very easy, because we're not opening Flying Labs. Flying Labs open themselves. If someone, and like Tawanda, a good year and a half or almost 2 years ago, was interested in saying like, I would like to open a Flying Labs in Zimbabwe. So there's a process in place that allows anyone that has kind of proven experience in our work to be able to say, I would like to open a Flying Labs in my country. Joining again through their own demand. And when we ask them, like, why are you interested to join? The main majority is joining to gain access to greater connection, to knowledge, to technology, to opportunities, and to visibility. So here again, it's not just about the tech, it's about so much more than technology. And I personally believe that the biggest value of the Flying Labs network is the network itself, is bringing together 33 countries and local leaders on a topic they all are very passionate about, to share, to collaborate, and to just openly help each other to grow stronger. And this is why the key values of the Flying Labs network are also sharing and collaborating. And by being part of the network, finding ways for each Flying Labs to actively contribute to the network's purpose and to its growth on a global basis. So local to global and not global to local. That's kind of the look you could take. And I try to, in just one slide, kind of give you an overview what the model kind of looks like of the Flying Labs network. And, you know, one could say, we sometimes say it's a bottom-up approach, but if you look at here, it's actually a top-down approach. It just depends who is sitting on top. So for us, who sits on top is the local experts. And that's where it's all about local leadership and local ownership. It's about self-sustaining by building on existing organization, and it's driven by local demand and need. This kind of brings me back to the bullet points I had in the beginning to say, for us and for the model, the most important is really to say this is self-sustaining. So the sustainability part is kind of covered by saying you're building on existing expertise. It is fully about local leadership and ownership. And we believe that if you want to have ownership and leadership, then it's about agency. It's about who decides. And in this model, Flying Labs decide. And local organizations decide to join the network. It's not for us to decide. They'll decide fully on their activities, on their focus areas. They have full autonomy over choosing their projects, their trainings, and each Flying Labs is different. And this is, I believe, what gives the Flying Labs network also its strength. It's the diversity that each local hub, local lab freely chooses what they want to focus on, because it needs to be driven by local demand and need. And who else would know better than the local expert what the local demand and need is? Our role as V-Robotics, we see it really at the bottom. Our role is to elevate and strengthen and the Flying Labs network and the individual Flying Labs based on express demand and need. So we have a process and a framework in place that allows us to learn from Flying Labs in a very structured way, how they want to grow and what areas they're really interested in. And this kind of gives us the catalog of things to concentrate on throughout the year to elevate and strengthen the Flying Labs network. So we do not decide on our side what we will be working on. It's the Flying Labs telling us what they are interested in, and it is for us to support them in that. And that's why I thought that interesting thought when I came across one of the mentions that Jesus shared with me to say, like, we must include local partners as key stakeholders. For me, it's actually quite the opposite. You know, it's like, as with our model and our approach, it's not about us including local partners, it's about local partners including us. So it's a very, very different approach when it comes to that. And having Tawanda here, my colleague of Zimbabwe Flying Labs, I'd love to hand over to you and hear your perspective, because you're sitting on top, you're part of the Flying Lab. So do you have kind of the same view, and what would you like to share with us?
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much. I think you've really done well just to describe the Flying Labs and what makes it amazing. And it makes me think like, how grateful I am, I guess, to be part of the network, and just proud of, I guess, the impact we've been able to have just as a network. And I think from our perspective in the local context, what I would like to do is maybe tell you just a quick story. Just from our perspective, is why did we choose to join the Flying Labs? And I know Sonia was really sharing about, being part of the network and the benefits of it. But everyone has a different reason when they come across the Flying Labs, and then they decide to join. And I think for our perspective, I just want to share my screen here quick. Quick story. So our local story. When you look at Zimbabwe Flying Labs, we joined the Flying Labs. Now it's been about a year and a half now, but I first heard about the Flying Labs in 2019. And for us, what really brought that about is a local disaster that we had in our country. So we have cyclones that affect our region, probably a major cyclone once every decade or so. And we had a major one around about March 2019. At the time, I was already involved with technology, and more so on the drone technology side, and using drones from a perspective of it being emerging technology and a way to capture data and information. But in our local context, the technology had never been used in a way to address issues within the humanitarian side and disaster management. So what we did in March 2019, when the cyclone hit Zimbabwe and made landfall, we tried to use our drones, in a sense, in our community to kind of just fly around and try to do kind of assessments, but we didn't really know what we were doing. And we found that we weren't able to necessarily give the help in the local context that we wanted to, because the equipment we had, first and foremost, was not capable of actually being usable and in a way where we could actually capture data and information. In doing research and trying to find out how best can we leverage the technology to find ways to actually help and really help on the ground, be it search and rescue, be it post-disaster assessment, we came across the Flying Labs network, and we found that in the network there were already people who were doing it, right? And I'll point to Nepal Flying Labs, a region where in Nepal they have a lot of disasters, these kind of disasters, floods and that kind of thing. And to be able to see the benefit of being part of a community where there is shared learning and information, shared experiences, is one of the key things that really drew us to the Flying Labs. It took us maybe a couple of months afterwards for us to initially then, try and reach out and find out a bit more about, what the Flying Lab network was about. But ultimately, what we saw is that when we joined the network, it really helped us to then be able to say, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already, practices used, there's nothing new under the sun at the end of the day. Something that affects us here in Zimbabwe is affecting other people in India or in Spain or wherever it is. And if we can collaborate and say, okay, we've learned the lessons, we've tried out different data sets or different types of technology or different ways to approach it from a perspective of wanting to do good, then it helps us to do more. And to end off my story, what we've been able to do since then is, because we've been part of the Flying Labs, we've had the privilege of actually being part and parcel of a lot of different training platforms, learning from different people's experiences. And interestingly enough, as we're doing this conference, we actually had a cyclone that has now actually made landfall in Zimbabwe right now as we speak. It actually, hit Zimbabwe, I think, a day ago. And what we've been able to do since the time we joined and now is that we've actually been able to engage local partners and local nonprofit organizations and help them to develop policies around disaster management using tools and technology that helps us to get data. Data acquisition support, help, and also put ourselves out there to say, look, we can support whenever we have a disaster again, we're there and ready to actually deploy whatever technology is required and help and support in that way, as well as training. Training is probably the thing that I love the most and I've enjoyed the most, is being able to say, here's how we can use these tools to make a difference. And being able to have that training and be part of a network where I know, okay, we have case studies and we have use cases in other places, helps us to do better locally. It helps us to have more impact in a local context and not just be excited about the technology itself, but really actually do good with it. So that's my story of why we're part of Flying Labs. We do so many more amazing things. And yeah, I guess, that's kind of our story.
Excellent, Tawanda and Sonia. And I do have some questions that I'd like to ask you as we move into the panel discussion. I do wanna quote a friend and colleague of mine at Caribou Digital, Jonathan Donner. I'll have to read this because it's a little bit of a long quote, but I think it's super relevant, and I'm going to connect it to the presentation. So Jonathan Donner, at the very beginning of the pandemic, he wrote an article about the digital acceleration and or the acceleration of digitalization, and he said it is a very important moment not only for the acceleration of digitalization but also for its trajectory. The crisis is an important moment in which behaviors, norms, and policies can shift as much in a few chaotic months as they did in a more stable decade. It is also a moment in which deliberate pressures applied now can determine whether further accelerated digitalization leads towards inclusion and fairness and shared community or not. I think what I'm seeing from the We Robotics model, and I absolutely love that of, the local sits on top of the pyramid. The top down starts with the local, and not with that's a fantastic. And you guys are ahead of the changes, of those deliberate changes. I mean, and in so many ways, Raquel did the same. You didn't have to wait for the pandemic to tell you that we need to refocus. I mean, as a matter of fact, back in 2016, when the first humanitarian summit happened in Turkey, there was an agenda for localization, the Grand Bargain, I think it was called, or something like that. So the need for localization was already there. And it's just, there were a lot of politics, I suppose, and it didn't take the attention that it deserved. But I think this is a model that we all learn from. I think the one thing that I would say is obviously different organizations and different programs are executed differently. I mean, I would love to hear from Tawanda later. Before We Robotics came, how were they operating? Who were they partnering with? Which other organizations? But we'll go back to that in a second. In the first question of the panel, I basically wanna touch a little bit more on the how to create capacity for local partners. What is that capacity? Is technology-related capacity? Is capacity in a kind of a wider spectrum capacity? We want to hear from CRS and from Raquel on their views, and we want to hear from participants. So if you do have comments or questions, please let us know in the chat. So Nora, over to you. How is CRS, Catholic Relief Services, thinking about capacity for local partners, and in particular in relation to digital, because it's the subject, but how are you guys thinking about it?
Thanks so much, Jesus, and lovely to be here. That was so great to hear about Flying Labs as well. I think we'll have to have a follow-up conversation. I would love to learn more. So I think You know, Jesus, in your introduction, you were talking about how ICT for D is very established at CRS, and you're right. I do think it is. Having started with CRS about sort of 6-7 months ago, we inherited, you know, come into an organization that has a very strong ICT for D practice. We also have a really strong partnership and local capacity strengthening practice. But I'd say at the intersection of the two is an area where we're certainly still learning. And I'm sure, learning in both those areas as well, but certainly at their intersection. You know, we don't today have a formal sort of digital competency framework for local partners. We have started ideating around what an ICT for D in partnership sort of strategy might look like recently. But before I dive into that, I just want to take a step back and provide a bit more broader context on our work. So as I mentioned, partnership and capacity strengthening is really central to our values and mission as an organization. In fact, we work in partnership with around 2,000 partners around the world. And these are sort of the Catholic Church, faith-based organization, local communities, civil society organizations, governments, as well as the private sector. So I think when we're talking about local partners, I do think we need to be clear about who we're talking about. What kind of local partner? Is it a government? Is it a local NGO? Is it a community? Because we need to understand, particularly when it comes to digital capacity, but I think also more generally is, you know, what are their strengths and needs? What are the constraints and the opportunities that they have? And I think they are different, particularly if you take sort of the two that are a bit further apart, like a government and a local community, for example. I think that's very different. So I think we need to be clear about who we're talking about. Now, when it comes to strengthening capacity, at CRS, we look at strengthening both sort of programmatic and organizational capacity in partner institutions, because we think that by doing both, that's how we can really help these organizations, you know, get sort of an optimal level of performance for greater impact. And we do this together with the partners. We have a variety of sort of capacity assessments that partners can take to identify their strengths and weaknesses and come up with sort of action plans for next steps. In some of these, we have been able to embed a level of sort of questions around digital skills and particularly around data and data management. But as I said, we don't sort of systematically assess partners' digital maturity or digital capacity. And I think sort of we have an increased realization that in order to achieve transformational change at scale, which is what we want to do as an agency, we really need to enable our partners to leverage technology even more. And so in my view, we need to kind of look at how we can strengthen our partners' capacity to leverage digital technology in a sustainable and responsible way, so that they can increase operational effectiveness and impact. So as I said, we've started to think through how we can maybe do this a little bit more systematically. So not just in certain sort of capacity strengthening actions here and there, and as a part as a small part in some existing assessments, but how can we do this in a broader way, perhaps is the way to put it. And in some of the thinking and the conversations that I've been having internally around this, I think what we're sort of learning or what the early thinking is that we have is one thing that we need to do is to look at, okay, well, what are the key digital competencies that our different partners need, right? So going back to understanding the typology of partners, then looking at, okay, well, what kind of tools could we use to, or could partners rather use to assess their own digital maturity? Again, recognizing partner typology. And could we potentially embed some of these sort of tools within existing tools so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and so that we're actually looking at capacity strengthening holistically and not just digital capacity strengthening in silo. And then looking at how can we design sort of appropriate capacity strengthening interventions then and support their implementation when it comes to building digital capacity. But I think internally, we also need to think about a few other things. And one is sort of our technology portfolio. So within CRS, we have a very strong ICT4D technology portfolio that we use and has been established for our needs and that we use. So what tool we use for digital data collection, what tool we use for geospatial modeling, for example, what tool we use for data visualization. And we have a really strong practice around this. But as we think about this from a local partner perspective, I think we need to think increasingly about, okay, does this tool work for the partner? And not simply assume that because we're working in partnership with another organization, they're going to be using the same digital data collection tool that we're using. So I think we need to kind of approach it a little bit differently. And start from looking at what are the partner needs, what are their capacities, etc., in order to make it sustainable, right? And I think the governments are in a particular category here. So when we're working with government partners, we often need to use what existing systems or technology they're already using and strengthen that practice. So what this has looked like very concretely in our work recently is in working on digital health in West and Central Africa. We've got governments in that region or in those regions increasingly using DHIS2 as kind of the basis for their digital health. And so what we've had to do is actually to build our capacity on DHIS2 because DHIS2 hasn't been part of our technology portfolio. So we've said, okay, well, if we're going to support these governments to strengthen their digital health systems, we're going to have to learn what the technology they're using so that we can actually support that work. So I think it kind of the capacity building then goes both ways, right? We need to learn stuff as well as our partners, and we need to strengthen capacity on all sides. And then the final point I'll make is that we're also looking at, how can we build partners' capacity to do things independently and to really make their own decisions when it comes to what technology they need to use and how they can build their capacity on that technology. So it kind of goes back to, okay, what are those sort of digital skills that are needed, as well as maybe developing some guidance on how to choose the right technology, when is technology the right option for you, so that our partners can make their own decisions using some of these job aids. But I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Not a lot. I mean, there's a lot there, and obviously, I guess CRS is involved in so many different type of programs, and again, it's involved not only in humanitarian but in development programming as well, which again I think presents completely different capacity building context, especially when you're thinking, around things like sustainability of that capacity. And I think one of the things that I particularly like that you highlighted, which was one of my questions, is who are the local partners? I mean, are the communities themselves? Are the implementing partners? Are the governments? And I think technology, innovators, basically, in the places where we're working. One of my favorite organizations that I've learned about in recent years is called Bridge the Bridges, and it's a spin-off. It was founded by Dario from former GSMA Intelligence, and what they've done over the last 2.5 years, creating innovation maps of Africa across sectors, across technology domains. It's just unbelievable. I'll put the link in a second in the chat for everyone to have a look. They be very much focused on Africa, and what they do is create knowledge infrastructure for leaders in each country and for investors all around the world to focus on the local ecosystems. But what's amazing is how rich these ecosystems are. This is not a question of that there is a lack of innovators like Tawanda wanting to become leaders, not only of Zimbabwe, but of the world in robotics. I think what we're going to hear about is that example of an organization that was born in South Africa out of an SMS programming. Well, and probably there's a lot more, Debbie, on that you'll talk about in a second. But an amazing program, Moms Connect, that started with SMS, and all of a sudden we say, you know what? What if WhatsApp help us with the uptake and with the impact that we're doing? As a result, in a very relatively short period of time, this is an organization that has gone global with a very simple yet innovative piece of technology called WhatsApp, and what you can do on the background of WhatsApp. So we're gonna be here, but I love the fact, Nora, that you highlight there are many different local partners, and I think we need to be looking at them in a variety of ways depending on the programs. And that's what we're gonna be here now is one of those local partners that happens to be a technology solution driven, obviously doing many more things to engage with the community that is using WhatsApp for social impact. So Debbie, over to you. We want to hear your perspective.
Thanks, and thanks for such a lovely introduction. As you mentioned, we were founded back in 2007 in South Africa, and we still primarily operate outside within South Africa, but our work is now global with organizations like the World Health Organization, and just recently in the last 2 years, our COVID-19 work has been adopted by 11 governments and ministries of health within Africa and Southeast Asia. And it's really been an exciting ride for us, going from, as you said, a fairly complex program like the Mom Connect program, which we built in collaboration with the National Department of Health in South Africa. They are the strategic leads of the organization, but we have a really strong partnership with over 30 partners who made this possible since its launch in 2014. And being technologists at heart, that's how we started. I think we keep thinking about how we can do more with less. And I think that what we're really wanting to do is to empower as many people to be able to use simple technology like WhatsApp to improve the health of citizens and to improve health systems. And that's really what we've been focusing on the last few years. We don't generally build new applications or new platforms that people have to use. We really focus on using platforms that people are already engaging with day to day. There is no need for training to teach you how to use WhatsApp. That happens already, and that's taken care of. It's also probably the most likely app you have on your phone, and probably the one you keep, even if you don't have much space on your phone. Also probably the one you'll keep your data costs for, because it's your primary way of communicating with people. So rather than trying to build something additional, which now has to have training and people have to work out a different way to engage with something, we try and use something that's fairly ubiquitous. And as you said, we started with SMS and USSD, and now, you know, our largest programs are primarily run over WhatsApp, thanks to its enormous adoption in the countries that we certainly focus on in Africa and Southeast Asia. I think that, you know, we've gotten pretty quickly from being an organization that runs our own programs, builds our own tech. We've worked with open source, and so have a group of engineers who do a lot of coding for us to get to something that is Mom Connect and can be at the kind of scale that Mom Connect can be at, because there are not many platforms that allowed us to do it at that kind of scale. But we really wanted to be able to empower more people to do it. And as much as I love what Sonia said about it's not about the technology, because I think ultimately when you're implementing a program, it's not about the technology. I do think there is a place where technology can help to enable partners. And so I think the other way that we've been thinking about this is that we went from, you know, building our own bespoke programs using open source. You know, people had it available to them. Doesn't mean anyone used it because it was so technically complicated, and there was nothing around it that helped anyone to implement a program, to trying to see how we could create a platform that can be used by multiple organizations, and then the training and community around that. And we actually took a very different route, and we founded a for-profit social impact business. And within that, we developed a platform called Turn.io. And Turn is there to allow as many organizations as possible to leverage the business API of WhatsApp to develop conversations that can help in any development space. So doesn't have to be specifically focused on health, which is where PregHealth.org has been focused for many years. It doesn't have to be for 1 million people. It can be for 1,000 people. And it shouldn't have to be something that needs an army of developers behind it for it to make sense and be easy to use. And so we've gone from sort of empowering 5 partners by implementing in different countries very closely with them and building out quite bespoke platforms using open source, to now 180 partners using our Turn.io platform in just 2 years, and building out a community of practice around that, and a number of initiatives to try and help these organizations to just make the most out of the technology platform that they have. And so I think in that way, just thinking differently about the way that we build technology, the way that we use technology, and the way that our partners might want to use technology. We have, I guess, leveraged the technology in the end, hopefully, to empower our partners. Now, I don't think that if I transplant a piece of technology into a country, it's going to magically do anything. After all, it is the people behind it and the programs and the partners and what they're using it for that is most important. But I do think we can think differently as a community, particularly as the very technical organizations that we often are, and think, how can we actually, in a way, eat our own dog food and use the technology that we have to empower more and more and more people. I think central to this is there is so much work to be done in ICT for D, and no one organization is going to do it. In fact, probably no 100 organizations are going to do it. There is so much work to be done on so many difficult problems. And the people who understand those problems need to have the tech available to be able to solve it. I'm a technologist. I can't solve the problems of agriculture, but hopefully I can provide you with a platform that makes it easy for you to be able to leverage your expertise. And that's really, I think, also what I think the Partnerships for ICT for D conference is about. If there's so much that needs to be done and there's so many people who want to be doing it, we have to be empowering each other, and we have to be sharing and learning and creating communities so that we can do as much as possible with as little as possible.
Excellent, Debbie. Thank you very, very much for sharing that the journey of PregHealth, that I think is it's absolutely outstanding. I mean, it almost reminds me to other organizations that we work with, like Tanzania D-Lab, that I know that we work as part of the Data Fetu program that we did there a couple of years ago. But I think your last comment, by the way, is a perfect lead into the next part of the panel discussion, which is about how to organize knowledge exchange within a partnership and beyond. So I'm going to start this part of the panel discussion with a question from the audience. Keely Noyles was asking. It was a question directed to Tawanda, I think relevant to absolutely all of us. What has been your training process for local partners to get accustomed to the new technology? How has the pandemic shifted your training strategy, your capacity building strategy for local partners in the field? So, Tawanda, I'm personally interested in hearing, obviously, from your perspective, Tawanda, but also from the perspective of We Robotics as well. If We Robotics has shifted the way you guys, if it had to be shifted the way you work with your flying labs as a result of this. And I think Nora from CRS also has some perspectives from there. So Tawanda, over to you to start with.
Yeah, thanks, Jesus. Yeah, so just from our perspective, just when we look at our training processes, when we look at local partners, I think Nora touched on it, and I heard also, Debbie mention it, is, part of a process that's important is discovery. We call it our discovery process, is really trying to find out the needs of the local partner. Oftentimes, you want to adopt technology because you've seen it being implemented somewhere else, but it may not be what you need in the local context. So before we even go and start saying, hey, we want to train and bring in this technology because you've seen it being done somewhere else. We've got to look at the local context. Does it work? What would it take to implement it? And how can we sustain the technology? I'll give you an example. One of the things we're working on locally is we've been approached to try and help bring solutions in the medical space, to bring last mile delivery solutions using drone technology. And we're looking at it and saying, it's one thing to buy and acquire the drone, get trained on how to operate it, but it's a completely different thing to have a logistics system that works 24/7, 365. That requires a whole different kind of investment, a whole different kind of set of partners to bring it in. But when they come to us, they're saying, please train us on how to use drones to deliver medicines. So it's really looking from that perspective and saying, let's first drill down on what is it that the local people need, and is it sustainable? What is it going to cost in the long run to implement that technology? The support required, the people, the training, etc., beyond just bringing in the newest and best tech that you've seen working somewhere else. So that's us, just in terms of processes. Once we have found, obviously, someone and it's the right fit, we are able to then leverage. We have learning platforms, and within the We Robotics kind of platform that they've built, we have online training programs and courses which we have access to, but also other people have access to, right? So again, there's a cargo medical drone delivery course that We Robotics designed, which we can now take to our local partners and say, okay, we will train you on the ground, but here's a theoretical course that you can take that will give you an understanding and overview from a partnership perspective to say, what do we have to look at when we want to implement this kind of solution in this case? So it's collaborative, because as we are learning, even training, we then add to the network and everyone else is sharing. So what you'll find is that when someone else in Tanzania, you mentioned Tanzania, right? When they want to implement a similar project, or there's local partners, right? So be it Catholic Relief Services in Tanzania, they want to do a similar project, and we've done something here, then we can be like, okay, guys, here's what you need to look at in the context on the ground before you even engage in that kind of process. So that's just us in terms of processes. And in terms of the shift, I'll just mention this on the shift. What's shifted for us, and I guess we've been part of the network, we joined during the pandemic, but the benefit we have is we have online webinars. So we have trainings. Almost every month, we're training on different topics, different types, from data acquisition to data processing to how to engage to how to turn data into action. It's one thing to have data, but how do we actually make it make sense? And how do we use that data to make decisions or inform the people who need to have the decisions and encourage them or nudge them in a way to use the data in the right way? So we have a lot of these trainings, and that just helps us to stay current, more relevant, and provide solutions to whichever local partner we're working with. Excellent.
One of the things, and maybe this is a question for Sonja and Nora from We Robotics and CRS perspective. What if any change process are you following, in the sense of we are there for the local partners. We hear from them, and we are there to whatever it is that the demands are in terms of us supporting them and supporting the community. When I say change process, at least the way we look at it at IREX and across our programs, and this has been particularly exciting to see how it's evolved with the Learn to Discern program, a program of 20 countries on disinformation and misinformation management, is that we build, we apply, we spread, we reach intermediate change, and eventually, sometimes systems change. And as we go along that change process of building the skills, the attitudes, the competences, applying them, spreading them. And this is the local partners that are doing so. Okay? We start with the build, but ultimately the build that responds to the demands from the local partners. But it is them that apply, that spread, possibly reach that intermediate change level, and eventually possibly systems change, which ultimately is what we all want, driven by the local partners. Do you have a process at We Robotics and CRS that looks at change at that scale and that you learn from? Maybe Sonja, starting with you.
Thank you, Jesus. Really good question. Actually, we do. So for us, the first step, and we're nicely into that, and after 5 years now, was to make our own experience, to build the Flying Labs network as our own experience of localizing. We're nicely into that process, the kind of build process that you mentioned, Jesus, and made many adjustments along the way, many learnings, many failings. You'll learn when you do something new like this, and many things go wrong, and it's great because you learn and you adjust and you become stronger over time. So, but now we really feel to be at a good place to kind of say, how can we not only scale that in the terms of the network itself scaling, but how can we contribute to systems change? And what we just have put together in the last months is kind of documenting our model. We documented along the way, but kind of now taking that and saying, like, how could we possibly support other INGOs in adapting and adopting our model to localizing kind of the same way. We call it the inclusive network model. And it's something that we hope will interest a number of INGOs. We already have 3 really advanced discussions on the way for different topics than drones and data. One, for example, around GIS and GIS analysis, another one around gender AI, so very different topics, but to use the kind of same approach and that model of the inclusive network model. And essentially it's, again, that driven by local demand, building on existing local expertise and making it all about collaboration and sharing. And this will be ultimately our kind of contribution to systems change. And another part that we're working on is also then measuring, actually, do these kind of models, or does our way actually really localize? Do we reduce our footprint in the power footprint in kind of the environment? And where do power footprints grow locally through our model? So that's kind of our contribution we're planning, and there's much more information on that on our website under Shift the Power and Systems Change. Thank you, Jesus.
Beautiful, Sonja. I love the power shifting. Absolutely. So, Nora, do you want to comment on that? I'm sure there is a lot from CRS.
Well, there's a lot that's going on in sort of, what we're looking to do is influence, transformational change at scale. And it's all about, influencing partners, collaborators, systems, right? And there's a lot more people within CRS who I think are way more knowledgeable about this than I am. I think from my perspective, when we're looking at sort of the digital space, is what I like to look at is how can we kind of make something sustainable, and how can we influence governments, for example, to take up new ways of working. So I mentioned previously, we've been working in the digital health space, and specifically when it comes to digital campaigns. So in the malaria space, for example, when it comes to handing out bed nets and so on. And we've led the digitalization of those campaigns together with the government in many Western Central African countries in particular, to great impact. I think it's made the distributions more effective, faster. We reach more people, and we got the data to show it, right? That we've actually reached people and who we haven't reached, and we're able to kind of analyze that data. And so I think the next step for us is really to look at, okay, we've been doing this with the government. How do we institutionalize these approaches within the government so that when we stop engaging with the government, this is just the way that it's done, right? And that to me is sort of what we're hoping to achieve, and that will be one step towards, establishing the sort of transformational change at scale, right? It's in the digital health space, making digital health just the way things are done, right? So to me, that would be a success, and that's something that we're aiming towards in that space. Excellent.
No, so time is flying. We almost have now 6 minutes left, but I do want to touch on I want to merge actually two of the questions that I have in the panel before we go into final remarks and answer some. I'm hoping we're going to be answering some of the couple of questions that I've seen in the Q&A as well. So this in relation to sustainable change, sustainable transformation, so sustainable power shifting, however you wanna call it, and who is responsible for driving that change. Debbie, from your perspective, I mean, what's going to help take Raquel to even the next level? How do you see sustainability happening, and who is driving that change? I mean, I think it's ultimately local actors that need to be leading us and telling us, and I think for me there's still a role to play for very much a role to play to large organizations from an implementation perspective, but also from a connector perspective. I think organizations like TechSoup, for instance, that are partnering, the TechSoup NGO network, I think it's a fantastic way of combining that sort of private sector, technology sector that comes from, I guess, the Silicon Valleys and elsewhere, with local NGOs that are heavily focusing on digital as a way of helping integrate digital in programs for social impact. But how do you see that sustainability and who drives the change, Debbie?
I know how I don't think we should do it.
Very well.
And that's the start, I think. And I really, I want to commend We Robotics and Flying Labs, because I think you've really started to tackle this head on. And I think it's something that many organizations, NGOs, are not thinking about. And that it is, in my opinion, 99% top down. And the idea is that I've seen, and this is overly simplified, I'm sure, but you go into Africa, you give them a solution, you give them a bit of time to get on with it, and then they've got to convince the government to pay for it going forward. And that's how you make something sustainable. Sorry, I'm being a bit facetious. It's not as simple as that, but I just see that as being the expectation so much and that doesn't feel very empowering, to think that firstly you have the best solution, secondly you're going to help somebody else get to it, and then thirdly it's going to become their responsibility to make sustainable because you haven't managed to do that as yet. So I think that that we really have to be very careful of this colonization approach, and I'm glad to see that conversation is happening more and more as we move through many years of ICT for D. So definitely not like that. So in my mind, it is about partnership. And I think we have to be very careful when we think about that word. Partners do not have power over each other. Partners are there to all work together towards the same aim. And I think that if we start to adapt more of that thought process and think more that it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that we take this field further and that we make it more sustainable and ultimately have the impact that we want, then we're far more likely to have success than if we think it's about passing it over to somebody else.
Thank you, Debbie. And as time flies, I'm gonna, if that's okay with you, I'm gonna take this comment that you just made as your final remarks and call for action, if that makes sense. But I do want to invite the rest of our panelists, starting with Tawanda, for in a quick minute or so, any final remarks, any call for action, if you like, that representing Flying Labs that you would like to share with us and obviously participants in this panel. Tawanda.
Yeah, thanks, Jesus. Yeah, I think just maybe in closing is to say one of the biggest things that we need to look at is how do we build ecosystems that are collaborative and that follow just what Debbie was saying is an approach where it is an actual partnership and we define what the roles are and it's very clear and it's outlined that this is what we're bringing to the table. I think there's different experiences that we can get from each other, regardless of where we are around the world. There are obviously other skill sets that we can obviously contribute and that kind of thing. But any approach has to be looking at how do we build an ecosystem, not what can I get out of this person for this particular project and for this particular kind of space. And I think when we look at that from a space, be it technology, be it, from a digital kind of perspective, is we can do so much more together when we look at things the right way and have the right approach going forward.
Excellent. Sonja, do you want to go next? Final remark?
It'll be short because between Debbie and Tawanda, I think you pretty much summed up my thinking. Thank you, Debbie. I love what you said, and Tawanda, you just summed it up. So this is pretty much it. I think it's about collaboration and sharing, and it's about thinking from a INGO standpoint of view. Is like, what is our contribution? If we kind of shift around the top-down, bottom-up thing, it's everyone has a role here. It's not or, it's and, it's together. It's just about thinking, what is our contribution? Which all of us have something to contribute, and to rethink about the roles in this perspective. Thank you, Jesus.
Beautiful. And last but not least, Nora.
Sure. So one thing I often reflect on is how technology is an enabler, right? And I think it can be an enabler of partnership, and it can be an enabler of other work as well. And so when we work in partnership, the partnership shouldn't be focused on technology, right? The technology can be an enabler of the partnership, and it can also be something that is used as part of a partnership or whatever the goal is, right? As an enabler of achieving a goal. And I think that would be my main thing to say. Just don't go tech first, go partnership first.
Excellent. Well, just a very quick thanks for what I think has been a super fantastic panel. I hope we have answered all the questions that have been raised in the Q&A. I think we did, even if I didn't call all the questions, but I think as I was reading them, I believe we were answering them. Thank you, Tawanda. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sonja and Nora. I really hope this is the beyond. As I said at the beginning, I hope these conversations continue to happen, that we all learn from each other and our models, and that we take action, collective action with our local partners. And love again, Sonja, that at the top-down approach starts with our local partners and not with us. For me, that resonates, like when I said there's no last mile connectivity. The last mile connectivity is the first mile, and that's where we need to start. So thank you all so very much, and I look forward to continue these conversations beyond this panel.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thanks, Jesus.